You are now listening to the Select Gaming Podcast.
We got to catch up. So I've been stalking you on the PlayStation app here, seeing some of the things you've been playing. But what have you been?
How dare you?
I know I'm such a creep. What have you been playing that's been worthwhile, or like even worth discussing for the moment?
So I've been playing some bad games.
I've been playing some bad games too, some pretty boring ones,
but I've also been playing Atomicheart. Came out earlier this year in January. Other people won't know this, but we are noted BioShock fanboys. We are BioShock apologists.
Yep. I'm big BioShock man. I've played it all, even the DLC stuff. I love that series. Love it.
I remember when BioShock 1 came out, I bought the special edition for the Xbox 360 with the little Big Daddy in it. It's probably the only special edition that I don't regret buying. So I'm playing Atomicheart, which is essentially what if BioShock Infinite, but in retro future Soviet Union. And I'm having some mixed feelings about the game. Mainly, I wish it was more like BioShock. So it has this sort of like combat on one finger, on one hand, or powers on one hand and gun on the right hand, like the way that BioShock did very well. The game actually doesn't do a particularly good job in setting up exactly how combat's going to work. You know, BioShock did that really clever thing where it's like you knock a guy into water and then you take your plasmid that has the lightning and it's like, hey, I wonder if you use this lightning on the water while the guy and Atomicheart does none of that. Doesn't do a particularly good job in immersing you in the world. Like I could tell you what a plasmid is still, I don't know how many ever years it's been since I played BioShock, but I couldn't tell you what the plasmid equivalent is in Atomicheart. Doesn't do a particularly good job of world setting in that sense, and it doesn't do a very good job of leading you in to the point that it has its equivalent of plasmids. You're never quite sure how you get more of them or how you get more opportunities to expand them. And if that were the only problem, I could sort of force my way through this. I think what's worse about the game is that it's just like the combat is simply monotonous. Like you fight these creepy robots and that's all you fight. Like I'm about 4 hours in and that's all I've been fighting. Them and flying drones. And it's really, really obnoxious.
It's derivative of BioShock, but it's not following through. Like, is there a scare factor? Because, you know, BioShock had a lot of interesting political commentary about like a perfect utopia, but it very slowly descends into like madness. It quickly becomes a dystopia. I know nothing about this game aside from some of the controversy that I've heard about it with regards to current world events and politics and whatnot. So for someone like me who likes BioShock, like why would I play this? Because I'm not the biggest fan of first person shooters, right? Like I'm very particular about that. And the thing that made BioShock so special was, you know, on one hand you have one power and then on the other hand you got a gun. I mean, why are people picking up this game?
I don't know. I can't really speak to other people. I can tell you that I think you should pick up this game. I think you should, because I don't know if you'd like it, but I think it is close enough to the BioShock formula that I think you should pick up this game.
I would, yeah, because dude, I've been jonesing like ever since BioShock Infinite. I've really missed that sort of storytelling, like that sort of like Half-Life / Metal Gear Solid, like old school Metal Gear Solid way of storytelling. But it's weird when controversies surround games, I kind of just stay away from them longer because I'm just like I don't want it to poison the well. You know what I mean? A lot of it is just empty calories for sites like Kotaku and IGN to just make a headline and then that's it.
So imagine you've played BioShock and so if anyone who's played BioShock, you'll know that it's not just any utopia that BioShock is imagining. It's actually taking certain core principles or ideals that circulate in the American sort of intellectual or public consciousness about freedom or about liberty or about entrepreneurialism or so on. And it takes those core ideas and it says, what if the whole society was organized around that? And so BioShock becomes a sort of sheltered off world where sort of like Ayn Randian entrepreneurialism becomes the conversation, or becomes the sort of wholly organizing influence of a sort of rich elite that take over or create a separate state, a separate world, right? And Columbia does that in Infinite as well, in a different sense. Like, what if American innovation was the de facto thing? It's hard to say. So I described atomicheart as what if BioShock, but in the Soviet Union. But it's there's no sort of none of that same sort of philosophical underpinning that happens in a game like BioShock happens in a very serious way in atomicheart. So you sort of the game begins by you sitting on like a gondola, and you're like a military, you're like a Spetsnaz elite soldier, and so you're on this gondola, which is basically the train, the train in the beginning of Half-Life, and you look to your left and you look to your right, and you see like giant statues of Lenin and giant statues of Marx, and everyone is having their May Day celebrations. Well, I could describe them May Day. They're not May Day celebrations, or they're whatever is going on. I forgot exactly the situation. And you hear and you see these robots going around, and they're glorifying the Soviet Union and so on and so on. The controversy around this is the idea that this game glorifies the Soviet Union. And that seems about as absurd as saying BioShock glorifies the United States. It just doesn't.
I know.
It just doesn't.
You know what it is? I think this is an example of poor timing. And with regards to the timing, it's because of what's happening in Europe right now. For something like this, it is one of these situations where I don't want to say it's getting scapegoated, but because in all things in life, there's always a divide. There's always, you're either on this side or you're either on this side. And I think what you're probably getting with this game is, because it's, to your point of maybe they're saying it's glorifying, the former Soviet Union, and because of what's happening now, people are sort of like, well, this is just like some sort of a love song, right? Like, yes, this is some sort of a love song. And some sort of like glorification of like one side, and we must stop this game at all costs. There's so many examples of bad timing in many forms of media, but specifically if we stay in the topic of video games, when you look at the situation with Siphon Filter, the third game.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and you look at what happened with the poor timing with the release of how that cover looked in correlation to the events that happened in 2001 with 9/11. That's bad timing. That was not the game developer's fault. It also wasn't Hideo Kojima's fault to, they had to edit the crap out of Sons of Liberty because of what was going on in 2001. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's always going to be things that are misread out of context, or people are going to see some sort of people are going to be upset about things whether there's no intent to do that whatsoever. And I think with atomicheart, because it's a Russian-made game, it is generating a lot of controversy because of what's going on. But you're always walking on very thin ice when you try to ban art in some way, shape, or form. You have to be very careful with that, because I like to believe that a vast majority of people who are artists, whether they're musicians or filmmakers or video game creators, I tend to think that artists, they really are trying to create two things. They're trying to make a story. They're trying to create beauty in some way, shape, or form. So we have to be very careful when we approach these things, because it's easy to misread things when there's world events or poor timing, and you really don't want to be that person. Like, you don't want to be that Karen. You want to carefully deconstruct certain things like a game like this and just be like, listen, in 3 years, is this game even going to matter? Like, does this game have legs, by the way, to have a sequel or to continue? Like, what is this game in the spectrum of like where it stands right now, aside from the controversy?
So two things. Number one, It is derivative. It is derivative. Now, here's the thing. I don't really care that it's derivative. So weirdly, video games has find itself in this place where if every single title is not like forcing itself to innovate formally and aesthetically and so on, that it's a copycat of one thing or another, that it's that it's not worth playing, or that why is this created, and let me point out how strange that is, because if you are a genre buff in film, and you love horror films. You love horror films to the point where you're watching every slasher film that comes out. You will not be crying. You will be hoping for the release of a slasher film that was like the last slasher film you saw, because hey, guess what? Because you like slasher films. And so but game developing is somehow an even more complicated artistic endeavor than film, which is already complicated in and of itself, because it requires a level of technical complexity that I think potentially outstrips the film at least what a film could be if it didn't involve more sort of graphic computer generated imagery and so on. It's rare that we get games like Atomicheart, which are derivative but fine, working within a genre, right? So like I can name you the number of games that work within the BioShock tradition on both hands, right? And BioShock is what, like a 13, 14-year-old franchise at this point?
Just about, yeah.
Great. It's like BioShock but set in the Soviet Union, and it's sort of like revels in Soviet kitsch. Like, oh well. Like it's not an amazing innovative game, but fine. A game that'll never shut up about, Singularity, which you still need to play, and I curse you every day for not playing Singularity. You need to play Singularity. Very underrated game by Activision. Like in certain respects, you might say a game like Cyberpunk, in terms of being an immersive sim, sort of fits that, even though not really. Like maybe you can see like the Deus Ex games fit it broadly within this genre of immersive sims, but like that's it, right? So that's my first point. Like, does it fetishize the USSR? Like, yes, kind of. Does it praise Soviet ideology? Like, that's the second thing. It's like we are really bad in general, or at least we are bad at giving attention to like properly smart analyses of the politics of games or cultural objects in general, because we get so fixated on aesthetics.
Yeah.
And we get so blinded by aesthetics that we cannot breathe. We cannot breathe for a moment to sit down and absorb something. I mean, I won't reference specifically what you and I were talking about off air, but it's like we were talking about a film that came from a certain country, and just because it was telling us a version of a story that we're not familiar with, it got it called propaganda, and it called all these other things.
Yeah.
And you know what? I haven't gone fully through the game and through Atomicheart, and I can't tell you whether or not I'm going to be surprised by an ending where the corpse of Lenin gets reanimated like in The Simpsons, punching through the glass and comes back to life and brings about, and the Bolsheviks come to power again. I can't tell you if that's how this game is going to end. And if it does, well then, I'll eat my shoe. But it just seems to me that a lot of the commentary that's happening around this is boring, dull, uninformed, and I bet you half the people haven't thought long and hard about the actual politics of some of these items beyond the sort of aesthetics banner of it, right? Like there's a Soviet flag, great. That says that could literally be any type of politics to it.
Well, it could be a Rocky film, right? It's like, so it is kitsch, and I think, so I'm just going through some of these screenshots here, and I think this is just a reminder to me where good, interesting storytelling starts with some interesting imagery happening within the four corners of that screen. Things from the past that have weight to them, a history to them, those imageries, they do evoke a fear, right? And I mean, I think we're so very desensitized to like these, Call of Duty and Medal of Honor games, where to actually think about those images, if you had to experience a majority of those things, it's terrifying, right? And then on one hand, when you had these images from like atomicheart or like BioShock, BioShock Infinite specifically had a lot of religious undertones. And for some reason, that is the most least talked about one. In my opinion, like for some reason, I think it because it didn't take place in Rapture. So because it didn't take place in Rapture, I don't know if that drew people further away from playing it or whatever, or it wasn't on their list. The religious undertones in that game, I had to take a long walk after, because I'm like, I can't believe that they put that in there. And that no one was really talking about it. And the reasons for that is because religion is kind of boring. We've kind of exhausted everything and anything when it comes to that. With atomicheart, you have a lot of imagery from a time and place that to some people is scary. Some people who lived through that time, it would derive feelings of many different emotions. But the imagery, these images from the past, kind of like whether they be aesthetically interesting or evoke a fear. I mean, I look at a game like this and it's doing what BioShock Infinite did with religious undertones and did this sort of Americana, the best time to be alive was in the 1950s, but it's like that's not true. All of this stuff is a lie, and I think what you get is you get games like atomicheart and you get games like BioShock that just try to kind of contextualize the imagery that we've sort of known, but repurpose it in a game where it's giving the gamer like a different experience through these images to sort of look at it in a different way.
I just think like part of the if this game ends in a would you kindly mode,
that'd be cool.
Of course it would be cool.
Yeah.
Of course it would be cool. And I think most people, and in some ways myself included, we don't spend enough time thinking about how these things work beyond our sort of knee-jerk reactions. And there is no incentive structure for us to have, like you and I will have this conversation, partly because we're interested in these types of conversations, and partly because while we hope the algorithm picks us up and we become a multi-million subscriber channel, we're more interested in having the conversations we want to have rather than being purely clickbait about this. Like, I could have talked about this in January when the game came out, and our video would probably be doing a lot better. But we're not interested in having that type of conversation. We come to things as we come to them, and if it's delayed, it's delayed. But more to the point, there is a sense in which I think that people do not have the capacity to hold any type of opinion, or when confronted with an aesthetics that they're not familiar with, a political aesthetics that they're not familiar with, it's very easy to dismiss it necessarily as propaganda. And that is not, and I'm not denying, I'm not even denying the possibility that this might be propaganda for a state currently existing or formerly existing, because I'm not even, I'm only halfway through the game, and at the moment I'm contemplating my capacity to get over a current tedious bit that I'm going through, which is driving me nuts. What really annoys me about the conversation around atomicheart is that seeing Soviet flags and coming up with with largely moronic political opinions about this game's alleged, like the content of the game, forget about its sort of real world implications and who finances it or not, but the in-game politics of this game does not invite anyone to reflect. Any of the commentators who are willing to denounce this game does not reflect back in their own minds to the ways of game like Call of Duty or the Rocky Balboa games or Top Gun or any of those other games or movies or whatever feature the exact same iconography, but because we're familiar with it, that's not propaganda, that's entertainment. That is something that is driving me nuts. And what's a shame here is that there's a game here that, even though I think is a 3-star game, a 3 out of 5 game, I think that actually the conversation, ironically, makes me hate it even more, because it just annoys the living hell out of me. It just annoys the living hell out of me.
Thank you for tuning into the Select Gaming Podcast. Like, share, and subscribe. We create videos for the Select Gaming that are guided by our personal interests, and your support makes that possible.